everybody. My name is Bob Yapp, Y-A-P-P. You can find me at bobyapp.com. It's a very difficult URL to find. On that website, you'll find a blog with all kinds of blog entries that I've done over the years about how to take care of old houses. You'll find my school, the Belvedere School for hands-on preservation, and all the classes that we do in Hannibal, Missouri. That's where I'm from. Anybody ever heard of Hannibal before?
Oh, yeah.
So what is Hannibal known for? Mark Twain. That's right. It's his boyhood home. It's a town of 18,000 people that does almost $80 million in heritage tourism a year. It's an astonishing place. My wife and I, when we decided to open our school and she wanted to do a bed and breakfast, we went to Seattle, we went to all over, Louisville, all these different places that I've worked and know, and we ended up picking Hannibal partially because they reassessed our house at $800,000 when we got it restored. My taxes are $1,200 a year. And I went in to pay them. I thought they were quarterly. And the lady's like, well, you can pay them, that much quarterly, but that's a year. And I'm like, okay. But they don't pick up garbage. They don't shovel the street in the winter. You have to hire a private company to do it. So it's a very small town. It's very much like when Mark Twain lived. Sort of like that. This is good. So anyway, that's where I'm from now. I originally was raised in a city called Des Moines, Iowa. And Des Moines, Iowa is an interesting place. I'll tell you a quick little story about it. We moved and bought this house. So it's a 8,000 square foot, 5-story Italianate with a Belvedere. Does everybody know what a Belvedere is? Some people call them cupolas. But on Italianate structures, when you have a room jutting out of the middle of the roof, that's called a Belvedere. Belvedere in Italian means beautiful view. So the house has an entirely unobstructed view of the entire Mississippi River Valley. It's pretty amazing. And it was a slum apartment building. And they used all kinds of alternative materials in this thing. I mean, we were taking out drop ceilings and rakeable shag carpeting, and we had to have a party to, inform the cockroaches that they couldn't live there anymore. It was sort of an amazing place. And so we bought it in 08. Took 2 years to peel it back and get it so we could even, analyze what we had, because I'm on the road a lot doing these kinds of things. And I finished restoring it in 2014, turned it over to my wife. It's now a 7-room boutique bed and breakfast and our historic preservation trade school. So it's kind of an interesting place. It was founded by Kentuckians, Scottish Kentuckians, and the people that have been there generationally since the 1830s and 40s, their families still have Kentucky accents. So that is really weird, because I work in Kentucky a lot, and I moved there and all these people sound like they're from Louisville, so it was just interesting. We're here today to talk about alternative materials, which from my perspective is sort of an oxymoron, which means it's the opposite of what the reality of the world is in so many ways. What are some of the alternative materials out there today that people see when on houses? Anybody?
Vinyl.
Say again?
Vinyl.
Vinyl. Yeah, we see a lot of vinyl. What else? Anyway?
Party plank.
Hardy plank. Yeah, what's technically called cement board. Right. It's interesting because how this all started. The replacement siding started off with this. This is asbestos. I like to grind it up and put it in my cereal in the morning. It's called asbestos slate, and it is actually cement board. Now, the difference is from what we use as cement board today to what this is that this had asbestos as its binder. Today, they have to make it a little thicker because they're using a binder that's not as good, which is fiberglass. And I'll get to that in a minute. Then, and you know, here's the thing about these products. What do you notice about the face of this? Rough, but I mean, what's it trying to look like? It's trying to look like wood. All replacement sidings try to look like wood. So anything that's trying to look like something usually means it's garbage, right? From my perspective. This is my favorite. This is called Insel brick. Now, when this went on, you knew the neighborhood was on the upswing, baby. I mean, I'm talking about, this is really neat stuff. This has been tested, no asbestos, and it's just corn board, made with corn fibers and some resins and things like that. But that's an amazing product. And then we've got this aluminum and vinyl siding. I like this piece. I've been dragging this piece around forever. This is how it came off a building in Schaumburg, Illinois, which was a condo that they built, and this was in the sunlight, direct sunlight, for 6 months, and this is what happened to it. I drive by vinyl sided houses every single day, and they're all warped. And then, you know, if a rock, this was a rock from a lawnmower, this stuff fades so fast you can't even, you know, replace it, because the piece that you're replacing it with, even if it was the same color batch and everything, wouldn't look the same. And they've embossed wood grain into it, right? So there you go. That's that one. Now, so here's Insel brick, and now the vinyl industry is doing vinyl brick. And this is special. This has so the red is wearing off in my case because it's just painted onto the face of it. And it won't last at all. PVC, by the way, just so you know, and you may already know this, is the most toxic consumer substance ever created on the planet. And that's not just, you know, have I ever hugged a tree? Well, yeah, I hugged a sequoia. I couldn't help myself. It looked like an ant standing next to it, but I'm a practical preservation guy. So I look at alternative materials, we test them, we go through a whole process with the different organizations that I'm with. I belong to an organization called Preservation Trades Network. I'm a founder of the Window Preservation Collaborative, a whole bunch of different things, where we actually do testing, because for many, many, many years in the preservation movement, we worked off conjecture. And, you know, well, we think this is going to be good, we think this is better, we've seen this in the field, and field studies and observations are really important. But over time, what we've decided is that science really matters. So we want to augment all of our conjecture with science. And one of the problems with replacement siding, actually the only good replacement siding from a healthy standpoint for a house, was this asbestos slating. What they would do is, if you had a clapboard house, they would take the clapboard and they would put a piece of lath underneath this piece, right here, so it would make a flatter surface, but they didn't hurt the siding other than a couple of the nails holding that in. And they put this on. Now this is rigid, so moisture that is trying to escape the house can actually get out. And because with the vinyl siding, the aluminum siding, and all those kinds of products, it's interlocking, and they put it on what's called backer board. Now, backer board is just an insulation board. So we have people have to think about old houses and buildings, about how air moves. And moisture, we create moisture inside our houses, right? We take showers, we have dishwashers, we have, you know, we do things I'm not going to speak of that create moisture, all kinds of things like that, right? And it doesn't go up, it doesn't go down. It seeks out hairline cracks, outlets in the exterior walls, cracks in the casings, the baseboards, and it gets into the wall cavity. So, in new construction, what you're required to do, I couldn't buy anything, but I sort of like the fish scales. One of the #1 reasons for house rot in this country today is blown-in insulation in the sidewalls of old houses. Now, I can't put cellulose in here because it falls out, but this is a typical lath wall that would have 3 coats of plaster over it. And then they come in and they do this, they drill these really fashionable holes and put plastic plugs in them on the outside. You can drive by a house, a clapboard house, and you can see all these little plastic plugs. Well, that means cellulose has likely been blown in. So what happens with that? So as that more moist vapor from inside the house, and some areas are more prone to that than others, right? Kitchens, bathrooms, things like that. It finds those hairline cracks, it gets inside the wall, it hits the cellulose insulation, it wets it down, becomes a wet mass at the bottom of the wall, it rots the sill plates, creates black mold, permeates the sheathing and the siding, and causes catastrophic paint failure for pretty much ever. It is the absolute worst thing you can do. In 160 plus properties that I've restored, probably 100 of them were framed. And I have never blown insulation into the sidewalls of a single one. Now, we insulate the attics like crazy because you have to think of an old house like a chimney, and air moves upwards as it goes through the house. So you're insulating your attic and then sealing the exterior of your house to stop excessive air infiltration is very important. But if you seal up your house like you're putting it in a doubled up garbage bag, your house will rot away. You have to have an exchange of air in old houses. So these replacement sidings are not healthy. They create a vapor barrier on the wrong side of the wall. So when we do new construction, we put a 4mm vapor barrier on the interior of the wall, and then we drywall over the top of that. That stops that interior pressure from getting to the insulation. Old lath and plaster walls don't have that, right? They're just lath and plaster and a vacant cavity. Now that vacant cavity, if moisture does get in there, there's enough airflow inside that cavity to dry it out quickly. You don't have the kind of problems that we run into. So the number one reason for catastrophic paint failure in this country is blown-in insulation. One of the second one is power washing. So this is a piece of siding, and I don't know if you can see this, but this is about 900 pounds per square inch, and it makes grooves into the siding, and it drives moisture into it. So when I was on PBS, we had money to do a lot of testing, and we took power washing. We found these contractors, one in Minneapolis, one in Seattle, one in Dallas, or not Dallas, in where's the university in Texas? In Austin. And then did I say Minneapolis? Anyway, okay. So we found the best paint contractors there, and they all had matching shirts, and their fans all had their logos on them, and they were the ones that all the old house people went to. So we went to all 3 of these contractors just before they started working on a house, and they were pressure washing. And the contractor's like, oh, don't worry, Bob, we wait 3 sunny days before we start to paint. Well, the problem with that is that you cannot paint wood that's over 15% moisture content. And 15% moisture content is the maximum amount of water vapor that can be in the wood. Now, if you paint wood that's over 15, it might look like it's sticking, but everywhere that it's not 15 or below, it is not sticking, and gravity is sooner or later the hunks will fall off. So we tested before they started to power wash, and all the siding was right around between 9 and 12%. Beautiful, in all 3 locations, and there's different humidity levels and different atmospheric things going on in these communities. And then they power washed, and we tested, and all of the siding was over 70% moisture content that day. And so we waited those 3 sunny days and came back, and everything was over 35% moisture, and they were priming. All 3 of those paint jobs failed immediately and started to really show it within 3 to 5 years. Most homeowners think, are frustrated because they think I can only get a 3 to 5 year paint job. So what do? They called the Vinyl Siding Company, and they come out and put siding over it, which traps more moisture inside the wall with the backer board and the interlocking nature of the siding. And you've got just a total nightmare. So from alternative standpoint, what are the alternatives? Well, we were talking about cement board. One of the things we know about the early asbestos, which is called transite, all the asbestos siding was made in Canada. And of course, the biggest mines for asbestos in North America are in Canada. And what's interesting about this is that the house that this came off of was built in 1918, and this was the original siding of the house, which is really unusual. And this is in South Bend, Indiana, where I lived for some time. And it had 2 paint jobs on it. And so you do the math, 2 paint jobs on that house. So what we know is that cement board tends to hold paint for anywhere from 30 to 50 years. Now it will wear off and chalk off, especially if it's oil, over time. And you're supposed to use oil on cement board, which a lot of people don't. The modern cement boards, again, wood grain, and this is not a piece of modern. This is actually a piece of old slate that I found as extras in a basement of a house that had this stuff. But this is the more modern stuff, and you can see how thick it is compared to the old asbestos slate. They have to do that because of the binder. What I don't understand, have I ever used this? Yes, absolutely I've used this. But I don't use it on historic houses. I use a product that some of you may recognize. It's called a clapboard, right? But if I'm doing a carriage house reproduction, I have used this. I did a carriage house in Rock Island, Illinois, and because of how the lot was, it was a reproduction carriage house. We put this on the outside of it. And we did vertical batten board, but we didn't get it with the wood grain. This is not the smooth that they sell. This is the backside, but you can buy it smooth. Because when you paint wood, can you see the wood grain on real wood? Anybody? No. So why would you want to have something on your house or a reproduction carriage house that looks like wood grain? Doesn't make much sense to me. So anyway, we did this on this house, and some kids came by and burned the carriage house to the ground. But it didn't burn to the ground. It was the cement board. The carriage house was only 12 feet away from the main house. Not one singe. The cars were melted inside. All the woodworking equipment inside there was melted. Literally the steel, it was so hot, it melted everything. And the cement board stayed up and saved the main house from burning to the ground. So it's got a great fireproofness to it as well. So it's an alternative material that I use, but I don't use it on main houses because I can still buy this all day long. And what this is a #1 clapboard. This is what we call vertical grain or quarter sawn. So and we can pass this around, pass a couple of these around. And you can look, see, now this one is what we call rift sawn. It's not as old, but look how tight the grain is on that. So what's important is how they cut logs. So you have 2 basic cuts. There's several cuts. But in wood, when they take a log, and today they do what we call plane sawn, which is they cut the boards out of the log like this. And if you look at how the grain goes, you end up with a board that looks like this. With a floury grain on the face. That's called plane sawn. Now, the best cut, which is what you're looking at in that 6-inch clapboard, is quarter sawn. So they quarter the log and then they cut the clapboards or the wood out just like that, and you end up with a board that looks like this. Straight grain on the end, straight grain on the face, and that's the most stable cut of wood. Now a lot of old clapboard, like this piece and this piece, are also quarter sawn. Some of them aren't, some of them were, But one of the things I find fascinating is that a lot of contractors are back priming the clapboard. These pieces came off of two different old houses, and they are vertical grain quarter sawn, and they were never primed on the backside. So I don't back prime siding. A lot of contractors will, and that's their prerogative, but it's an extra step. And if you have a good sheathing with felt, we use felt. So I take siding off to repair it, and I find tar paper felt that was put on in 1891 or 1920 is still doing its job. You all seen Tyvek? So they'll put Tyvek on a building, and when they get it built, just to protect it, right? Well, if you go to the company, they'll tell you that if it's in sunlight for more than 30 days, the warranty is void. How many houses have you seen Tyvek sitting on for months and months and months? And so we go back about 6 years later, pull the siding off, and the Tyvek is dust behind it. So it's not doing its job to stop air infiltration from coming in, which is a big deal. So that cut of wood is what we look for in all kinds of things. Now, why is old growth wood better than all these alternatives? Well, here's a piece of elm, and you can look at the grain. Pass it around, it's heavy. It is absolutely the best cut. Now, old growth trees are gone. So I live on the Mississippi River, and what they did is they went up into Wisconsin and Minnesota, and they clear cut all the forests of all the northern white pine, and they floated it down the river in log rafts to Hannibal, Missouri, where I live. And they did that by drilling holes through the logs with an auger, and then they put hemp rope through here. Not smokable, but they put hemp rope through it. And so all of the joists and everything before 1870 in Hannibal has these holes through them. And when I bought my house, I'm like, was there a boiler system in here? But the holes are not in line with each other, and it didn't make any sense, and the local historian clued me in. But this is a very old growth northern white pine. It's interesting because Anderson Windows, 1939, sent a memo out to all of its dealers across the country and said, whoops, we've clear cut all the northern white pine for windows. We're going to have to start using eastern white pine, which isn't as rot resistant, so we're going to have to find a way to preserve and treat the wood. This is 1939. And all these executives understood that old growth wood was better than new growth wood. I'll show you an example here. So these are all brand new pieces of wood. People say you can't get this. This is your standard 3 1/4 inch tongue and groove Doug fir porch flooring. And you see it in houses, you see it in different places. And you can see it's quarter sawn. But look how tight the grain is on this. It's amazing. And this is pretty good. And this is what's called wrist sawn, where the grain's at an angle. So as a tree gets older and it gets surrounded by other trees, it grows slower, it goes through droughts, it goes through floods, it gets hardy. The spring, the winter wood is the dark grain line, and the spring and summer wood are the light grain lines in between the dark grain lines. And it gets more structurally strong, it gets more rot resistant as it goes. So today, where am I here? Here we go. This is what we get. And look how far apart the grain lines are on that compared to the siding. It's pretty astonishing, and that wood rots away so fast, it's scary. So, wood is a better alternative than all of these replacement products here. And again, cement board has a place, but not on the historic house, in my opinion. Now, I am building, for the first time, I'm building an infill house. It's going to be a Gothic, steamboat Gothic revival, 2012 pitch. Like this, like a church, and we're going to use cement board on the outside and then cedar battens. So it's vertical batten board on this, because we know this stuff holds paint for a long time. It's a brand new structure, and the track record for cement board has been around since about 1898, and it's a good product for that. Any questions about what I've been talking about so far? Everybody understands exactly what I'm saying? Yes, ma'am.
I apologize, I came in late, so you may have already covered this. I have asbestos siding on my house.
Do you lick it often?
I do. It actually does wonders for my memory.
That's good.
Hardy board is what we're supposed to use according to the Preservation Society, the Historical Society.
To patch it.
Yeah, because I mean, that's the only choice we have. We're not given any other choice. You can't take it off and put any other siding on the house. And I do have a number of tiles that have, shattered. Are you suggesting that there's another material we ought to use besides this cement board?
If you have this old asbestos slate on your house, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost that color too.
Is it over the original clapboard?
I have not seen any clapboard underneath.
So it may have been original. And that,
When you pull the slates off, there's just felt target.
yeah, okay, so they either took the siding off or put felt over the siding, so you can't see it.
Yeah, it's not there. You can see
Okay.
right through the house where the felt's on.
So
Spelled,
modern cement board is a way to patch it, but there's also salvage operations around the country that are now salvaging asbestos slate.
I had that opportunity actually to salvage it and looked at the price of hardy board and said, yeah, why, go through the effort.
Yeah, but if you don't have a lot, if you've just got small areas to patch, sometimes if you're going to a salvage yard can be a good way to get it. But hardy plank is a way to go, but you just have to remember that it's thicker. Like I was
Have they
showing.
not planed it down to the same thickness as the stuff that we're replacing it with?
Well, it's cement, so you can't plane it down.
Mold, wood mold, whatever they do,
Yeah.
they get to. I mean, you
But,
think since they
but
don't.
John Hardy Company can get it a little thinner for you. You could order it, the thinner panels than this.
Okay.
So that's a possibility for you. Interesting that same as the house I took this off of, it was original siding.
Yeah, I guess it's that color, so you got more of that.
I actually do, but it's in Hannibal, Missouri. From a siding standpoint, I just don't see how you can get any better than what we've got. And it's available. So there's, if you Google cedar brokers, you're gonna find a whole bunch of people that find good cedar products for you. And especially siding and shingles. So let's talk about shingles for a minute.
So what did you say that was? Cedar, what? I couldn't get a second.
Cedar broker.
Cedar, well,
Yeah, they're men and women that find sources for you.
got it.
And there's a bunch of those different people up in Chicago. Might even be a few here in the Cincinnati area. And they can locate more cost-effective loads. So it might be something that was cut up a year and a half ago at some small mill that a family owns in Oregon, and the price hasn't come up yet because prices on cedar are up about 25% right now, and which is really tough. And I can't figure out why. Greed, because it's all manufactured. It all comes from Canada and the U.S. Maybe there's some issues getting it back into Canada. I know that when Bush was president, he put a tariff on all Canadian cedar, which is the best that we can get, especially clear cedar. So we just got done creating a pavilion in the yard of our bed and breakfast. And it's a hip-roofed square pavilion, and we put a cedar shingle roof on it. Now, originally, most of these houses, in the Cincinnati area, you've got a variety of clay tile, slate, and what we call standing seam metal roofs, which were usually made out of tern metal, T-E-R-N-E, which was a combination of copper, lead, and zinc, and you had to keep it painted. If you didn't keep it painted, it would rot away. It was sort of like the first galvanized effort to make our more rot-resistant metal, but if you didn't paint it, it rotted away. But cedar shingles were the predominant, and white oak sometimes on the eastern seaboard, white cedar sometimes, but mostly in the Midwest, you saw cedar shingles. This is an example of the cedar shingles that we just put on this pavilion. And it is tight grained, straight grained, which means quarter sawn, and it's heartwood, so there's no sap wood on it, which is lighter colored wood. And this is just about 5/16 of an inch, maybe close to 3/8 on the butt. It's 18 inches long, with a 5-inch reveal, which means each row is 5 inches. You end up with almost 4 layers of shingle every square inch. Now, the big mistake that people make today, when they tear off these old cedar shingle roofs, and they might have 3 or 4 layers of asphalt shingles on top of them, and they get down to what's called the spaced decking. Which looks like this. So you have 1x6s, sometimes 1x4s, with an 1 or 2 inch gap in between them. And then if they're going to do a cedar roof, many of the contractors will put sheathing on the roof and then lay the shingles on it. So that's about a 12, maybe 15-year roof. You lay them on the original spaced decking like this, and you've got a 50 to 60-year roof. That's the difference. Because in the attic of the house, air is flowing. And when this gets wet, air is flowing on the outside, air is flowing on the inside, and it dries the shingles out faster, and they last much longer. Now, you don't want to put a cedar shingle on anything less than a 6/12 pitch, which is about like that. The steeper it is, the longer the shingles last. I'm going to tell you a couple quick stories. So I've done a lot of cedar shingle roofs back on historic houses because I don't have to pay for sheathing. And that's a hassle getting it up there. I don't put any felt, no tar paper, nothing. Because if I do, I'll have a roof that won't last. So my cost is not that much different in the final analysis to do a cedar shingle than it is to do what everybody's using today, which is the laminate architectural shingle that you see on so many houses. Now this is if you're lucky, you're going to get 20, 25 years out of this. And when they tell you that it's got a 35-year warranty, they're just lying to you. It doesn't last that long. So you can figure that an asphalt shingle roof is going to last somewhere around 20, 25 years. Now, if you can get 40 to 60 years out of a roof, and you're paying more to do it, the payback ends up being better. But we were having this conversation last night. This is West Banco. She's
Jeannie.
This is Jeannie. And they're a good bank that does lots of rehab loans and stuff like that, which is what we need for people in neighborhoods. What the hell was I just saying? Huh? Say it.
Roofs.
Roofs. Yeah, I know. I'm talking about roofs. Oh, okay. All right. So the bottom line for me is that I end up with a roof that's going to last longer, cost me about 1/3 more, but it pays off over a period of time. So I had 2 houses. So I put cedar shingles on a Gothic revival in Davenport, Iowa, overlooking the Mississippi. Beautiful house. And it looked like an A-frame every time I walked my Newfoundlands by it in the morning. And because it had a 2nd floor deck going all the way around it. And one day there was a for sale sign on it. And I walked up the big hill to get up to it. Oh, beautiful view of the river. Unbelievable view of the river. In fact, it's all John Deere executives from Moline that have bought it every 4 or 5 years because people don't stay in their houses. That was the point I was getting to. It used to be 7 years on average, and now it's down to 5 years that people stay in their homes. So it just feeds the throwaway society, the whole McDonald's syndrome. We want it fast, we don't want to lift a finger, and we don't want to pay much. That is the mentality that we have in this country today. And that's a serious issue because it's not sustainable. And so all these flipping shows, every single one of the hosts of those flipping shows, there ought to be a prison just for those morons because they don't know what they're doing. They're doing really, really substandard work. And all these journalists are now going back and looking at these flips and they're falling apart. Because, you can't be really cool unless you have granite countertops, right? I mean, isn't that right? So I did a study on countertop materials for Renovation Style magazine. And what do you think is the most sanitary countertop material?
Formica.
Formica is at the very top. Stainless steel and Formica. The worst, granite and other stones. They have porosity and the bacteria just lingers, and if you don't reseal them every 2 years, and they're just a nightmare, and they're not very forgiving, not very warm. So when I do all my historic houses, most of them never had kitchens on the first floor, especially at where I live, which was Hannibal was a completely Confederate town. And the guy that had my house built by his slaves was a Confederate, just a stone cold Confederate. So getting back to these houses, so I shingled this house with cedar shingles on space decking. I use 20-ounce copper flashings. It's beautiful. This John Deere executive buys the house, and a guy comes and knocks on his door and says, "Hi, I'm a big roofing contractor here in Davenport, and your shingles have turned gray. So they're gonna start leaking immediately. You need to get rid of this roof." The roof had been on 10 years. The guy stole all the copper and put a roof on it, this type of roof, and that house has been leaking ever since he did, because he didn't know how to flash chimneys and those kinds of things. All right, so let's talk a little bit about windows. How many people, it's okay, you have replaced windows in buildings, in old buildings. Raise your hand, it's okay. All right. So you know you screwed yourself, right? You understand that. Because what we've done is we've done studies, and we've done all these field testing and everything that you can imagine through the Window Preservation Collaborative. We hired this guy, so in Pine Mountain, Kentucky. Anybody heard of Pine Mountain? Pine Mountain is one of the iconic places in the state of Kentucky. It's up in the Appalachian Mountains. And it was a settlement school that was founded by 2 lesbians from Chicago, which I just love. I just find that hilarious. So social work as we know it today was invented by a woman named Jane Addams in Chicago. And Jane Addams had settlement houses, and she was feeding poor people and educating young kids in the more depressed areas of Chicago. And that's really how the social work movement began. So these 2 ladies came up to Jane Addams, and they said, "Well, what about all the rural kids who are starving to death and not getting educated?" And Jane's like, "I can't do everything, so go forth and do whatever you want." So these 2 ladies bought 3 mules, and they started riding into the Appalachian Mountains, and they were in their late 70s when they did this. So and they didn't know where they were going or what they were doing. And they met this guy named Creech, who owned Pine Mountain and the land below in the valley, and he gave them all that land in the mountain if they would build a settlement school for the kids down there, and they did. They hired a female architect out of Kansas City, and she wanted to be an architect, and her father wouldn't let her, so she ran away from home and went to Paris and got her architecture degree. Came back, her father was the biggest residential developer in the early 1900s in Kansas City. He refused to hire her, and so she started her own company. And he disowned her, took her out of the will and everything, because it wasn't proper for a lady to be an architect. God, times have changed, haven't they? Well, at some level, times have changed. So we went down there and we wanted to do some testing. So there was one building, and she designed 40 different structures there. Timber frame, German country, Tudor, cabins, you name it. She designed them, and they were all built and rotting into the ground. So we went there to start working on these buildings, and it's been an ongoing effort ever since. So we took all these double hung windows, one above the other, in this building. And we hired the #1 energy tester, whose clients were Marvin, Pella, and Anderson Windows. And he came, and I had to raise $100,000 to get him to come. And he came, and he put his arm around me and the other founders, and he said, "You know, all these people are going to be coming, hundreds of window restorers and architects and all these people. And I don't want you to be too embarrassed, because this isn't gonna happen. The window industry spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year or over time to test these windows, these high performance windows, and this isn't gonna happen. So he goes in, he seals everything off. We're testing for air infiltration because there is no such thing as insulated glass. The only way you can insulate glass is if you do this.
That's putting insulation in between the panes.
No, it's got insulation between them. That's the only way you can do it. Glass is the worst thermal unit in the world. The Department of Energy, the US Department of Energy, and all of its testing, certified testing labs say that your crappy windows with the ropes broken, the putty falling out, some rot, and some cheesy storm aluminum break your fingernails off, not even a good windbreak storm, it constitutes in your entire property at a maximum 10% of your energy usage. 10%. That's almost insignificant. Doors are 11%. Your electronic equipment is more than that. Penetrations where wiring goes through and plumbing goes through that aren't sealed constitute more energy usage than windows. So if you take and you weatherize an old window, and we use a system, so in my house, this was the track system that was retrofitted into my 1859 windows in 1893. And this is the system that most of us doing window restoration use, and this is the new version of it. And so let's pass these around so you can see them. That's just a slot in the side of the track, of the sash. It creates a track. It makes it so that the window can operate with one finger. You're still using ropes and weights, and it stops the air infiltration. Then in between, at the bottom rail, we use a rubber gasket. At the meeting rails where the two windows meet in the middle, we use a rubber gasket. And at the top of the upper sash, we use a rubber gasket. And that takes that entire window and stops all air infiltration coming around it. Now, you may have to go out and caulk your casings. When we do paint jobs, we use a lot of caulking because it's important to seal off the areas where excessive air infiltration can come in. So when we tested in Pine Mountain, he would not come out. He did his first round of testing, he wouldn't come out. And we're like all freaking out, and because in a couple of days he had to give his preliminary results. And so we had a couple of interns in there with him. He wouldn't let them leave. And so we're sliding food underneath the door, and the next day he does a whole nother round of testing, and he still won't come out. And we're still sliding food underneath the door to this guy. And on the third morning, he did another round of testing. He came out, he hadn't taken a shower in 3 days. He smelled, he hadn't shaved, and he came through, he made it like 2 minutes before he was supposed to give his preliminary results. And he said, this is the most embarrassing moment of my entire life. These windows have so much better protection from air infiltration than any replacement window on the market. There is not one window on the market. He was summarily fired when we published the results by Anderson, Marvin, and Pella. They would no longer use him because they were so upset that we showed objective data that their products are garbage. And I said this in the talk the other night, and many of you weren't here, but in 2019, 119 million window sashes went to the dumps in this country. 119 million, that's a $9.75 billion industry. You extrapolate it out, and you've got that many window sashes, tops and bottom sashes that went to the dump. Now, 20 years ago, that was all original windows. But today, just under half of that 119 million, so 50 million plus, of the windows that went to the landfill were less than 20 years old. Less than 20 years old. And some of them were the second round of replacements. So, replacing your windows is like, quality carpet lasts longer than new windows. And it's a structural element. It's also this really important element of window houses. So the American public has been sold a lie. Insulated glass is no such thing. The amount of difference in the thermal capability of a double pane window And a single pane with a storm, a single pane with a storm has better thermal capability than any double pane window. And even a single pane window, it's only a 0.55 R value, so U value. So the British said, we're going to calculate the thermal capability with the letter U. And so the lower the number, the better. Now, they used to do it with R values. So lower or higher, better in R values? Higher, right? So U value is just the opposite. So a vinyl window out of the box is a 0.55. A single pane window without a storm is a 0.57. So the difference is almost negligible. And then when you put in a double pane window, well, you're down to a 0.37 or a 0.35. It's insignificant. It's a waste of money. So the best payback that we can find anywhere in the country for a replacement window, that means you save enough energy to pay for that job over time, is 42 years. That is not a payback. We put geothermal in our place, our 8,000 square foot place, cost us, after the tax credit, $32,000 to put it in, and it paid for itself in 6 years. That's a payback. 42 years is not a payback. Yes, oh, I thought I saw you. It's just you. So, we buy into a lot of nonsense. Another thing is rotted wood. So we do a lot of what's called Dutchman repairs, where we take old wood, and if it's really rotted, it's a big piece, we put a new piece of wood in, and then we fill in around with architectural epoxies. So there were 140 of these on a balcony, and the bottom rail had dropped, so water was coming around and rotting the bottoms of these. So we soaked this with liquid architectural epoxy. Then we stuffed the architectural epoxy into this after we did the liquid. And then we beat cut it just like it was originally. And so this total piece right here is $1.12 in epoxy and 20 minutes of time with an infrared heating device to take the paint off and ready for priming. And so you can see that it's very inexpensive, because to have these cypress balusters turn was going to be anywhere from $80 to $100, $120 a piece. So preservation is about saving money. It's about retaining original character defining features. We can get all of this stuff. Where are those flooring samples? I just want the flooring. Well, I gotta get it all. So this old growth dug for flooring is available all day long. So there are a whole bunch of mills out in Oregon and Washington and some provinces on the west coast of Canada that are family farms that went on a 60-year growth cycle back around 1900. So every year they have more trees to cut down. So 60 years and older is old growth, is considered in the industry. This really tight grain stuff came from those farms, and it's cost less than buying it at the big box lumber yards if you can find it. And the place that I go to get it is All True Fur. It's online. All True Fur. And they have relationships with all these places. You can still get it. Because the alternative to that, of course, is to use this resin-based crap, which has wood grain in it, holds mold and mildew, becomes slippery, and if you actually power wash it, it will take the surface off and the color off. You can't paint it. Porch floors were painted. This is a hardwood that was used on porch floors. This is Brazilian walnut. And a lot of people are using this on porch floors and painting it. Well, you can't paint hardwoods. Hardwoods have tannic acid in them and they will not hold paint properly. So we have all these alternative materials that a lot of people are using, but they're not sustainable. And the materials that were in the houses were sustainable, are repairable, and I would suggest that you are always better off using authentic materials than using, especially on the historic structure itself. All right, some quick questions, yes.
So what was the epoxy again that?
So I
you
use-
soaked it in what? And then-
So I use a product called Avatron. I know if you want to see this stuff. Avatron.com. And they have liquid wood, which is almost like a primer. And you can't use the wood epox, which is the putty, without the liquid. Fantastic. This is what I train all the National Park Service personnel to, is Avatron. But you can't be a putty goober. You can't go in and take a third of a sill and just build it up because it's too expensive. You know, it's $300 for a 2-gallon kit. Now, a 2-gallon kit for an average homeowner will last for 3 ground-up restorations. If you use it judiciously and keep the lids on it, it has a shelf life of a couple of years. Question? Any other question? Yes, sir.
Countertops, what are you recommending for?
So I use, so one of the most sanitary countertop materials that used to be at the bottom and is now up at the top is hard rock maple. Every single house that I restore, I put hard rock maple countertops in. And the reason I do it is because any kind of kitchen cabinet that used to be in that kitchen or what have you, pre-1900, before they enameled steel, was maple, almost exclusively. And so Grizzly, which is a woodworking supply place. Anybody ever heard of Grizzly? Okay, well, Grizzly.com. They sell these hard rock maple recycled. All right, she's like giving me this over here. You're giving me this over here. I got another hour? Okay. So hard rock maple actually, when it's sealed with an FDA-approved sealer, and it needs to be resealed maybe every 7 years, actually sheds more bacteria than granite or any of the other stones that are on the market today. So that's my favorite go-to, and I use it like crazy. People love it. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
You brought up a good point that I just dealt with this past week. I had a guy come out, I had some trim around my wood windows here in the court. He says, oh, you need to put the tight grains, so you put cedar in there. And it sounds like that was the right thing.
Yeah, cedar is very rot resistant and it's bug resistant, and it's great.
It charged me a huge price.
Yeah, it's expensive right now. I built, so our house had, all the original Italianate porches had been torn off. And I reproduced them based on paintings and later photographs. Every single stick of wood, except the floor, is clear western red cedar, and the floor is old growth Doug fir, which is real typical. So, yeah, good for you. I know you when you wrote the check, you about wet yourself. Anybody else have a question? Yes.
Is it like, for windows, that's why I got the wood, rattle and everything. Is there like .com site, find something?
Yeah, so the Window Preservation Collaborative, windowstandards.com. It's also a Facebook page. And there's lots of discussions on that Facebook page for window standards. We're the ones that wrote the book on best practices for all window restoration. We don't just put the weather stripping system I showed you in there. We have all the different weather stripping systems that have tested well, so you have alternatives to look at, and it walks you through what the best practices are. The Sash Bible is also an excellent book on the restoration and weatherization of old windows. It's the largest growing segment of the preservation industry right now is window restoration. Half the people coming into it are women, and they are kicking the men's butts. They're doing a fantastic job. All these young women are coming in and just doing excellent work. And I do work at George Washington's Mount Vernon home. And every time I go out there, I grab one of these great women that are doing great work and take them with me so they have a chance to get that on their resume and do some, and kind of as a reward for, this is wonderful that they're doing it.
So on this website then, do they kind of give like names of people?
So the Window Preservation Alliance, WPA, is the place to go to find all of the window restorers in every state in the country. And their job is to promote window restoration. The Window Collaborative's job is to do testing and best practices, so we work together very closely. They're good organizations. Listen, I've restored over 160 properties in my life, and I have never replaced a window for 2 reasons. I don't want to spend too much money, and I want my buildings to be energy efficient. And if I replace the windows, they will not be energy efficient, and I will spend too much money. And people walk by and they go, "Oh, you replaced the windows." No. My favorite thing is to buy an abandoned house, go clean the windows on the front of the facade, and people are driving by going, "Oh man, you've already been pumping dough into that house." No, we just clean the glass. Cleaning glass is a huge deal, yeah.
So, the house that we bought in West Kent, of the 3rd floor, those windows were gone.
Yeah, gone is average.
What would you recommend?
So I go to local, I do it in-house. We make our own sashes out of old growth salvage material, but there are regional millwork companies. I wouldn't buy a window from Marvin Anderson or Bill if you paid me $1 million. I am now restoring an 1857 stone house outside in Iowa. And I don't like to do projects like this. I like to do special stuff for the Park Service or George Washington's house, that kind of thing. But the guy called me up and he says, "I've got 19 6/6 original 1857 windows in this house." And I'm like, okay. And I said, "What do you do?" He says, "I'm the heir to the Pella Window Company." I said, "I'll take that job." Because I've been in court with Pella and they've lost. They've sued me and lost because I'm presenting data that can't be refuted based upon all the objective data that we've collected over this. Yes?
I have original flooring in my living room, and I don't know what's gonna rust my house every time I turn a corner or something bad.
I'm listening.
The flooring has holes or parts of the board are rotted up against like the edges of the room. What would you do?
Patch it in. So you can go to any salvage yard and they'll have all the old growth. This is, your standard 2 1/4 inch oak. You can get it thinner, 1.5 inches, what have you. All these salvage operations have it, and then we tooth it in where it's rotted and go with that. Wood flooring is one of the biggest problems. Windows are bad, but wood flooring is being decimated in this country by these cheesy laminates, and you've got all. I'm just sort of packing while I'm talking because they want to kick me out. And people are grinding floors, so I have never put a sander on a floor. And we do what's called passive floor restoration. We teach it at my school, and it'll be taught at the Covington Academy of Heritage Trades as well. A whole track on how to restore floors. If Grandma rocked in front of the fireplace for 20 years and made ruts in the floor, I don't want to grind them away. I want to, Mark Twain played billiards in my parlor and wrote his wife a letter saying that he got too drunk on whiskey with Mr. Lamb, but he beat Mr. Lamb in pool all night long. I'm not going to grind out the dents where the pool table was. I got an old Brunswick pool table. And my wife said, "Oh, no one will ever play it. It'll gather dust. Every guest that stays at our inn is playing pool every night. I don't care if they haven't played since they were in 3rd grade. Because it's just that Hannibal, that Mark Twain connection is cool. But we don't want to grind. All the drag marks are in that ash walnut striped floor. And we hand stripped it and we put, varnish on it. It's just absolutely beautiful. If you want your house to look new, go buy a snout house in a new development that has covenants, snout house being, 3-car garage, most redeeming architectural feature. But the covenants in those neighborhoods are more restrictive than local historic preservation ordinances and design guidelines. And that's also a big misnomer. I'm packing up, Christopher, doing everything I can.